Hello, my name's Lauren O'Connor, and I am an accessibility specialist within the Disability Equity Office. Pinned with me is one of our American Sign Language interpreters, Katrina, if you would like to utilize this service throughout. During today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about non-apparent conditions and self-advocacy for employees with disabilities. To get started, I want to go over an agenda. So let you know what I'm going to be talking about in today's workshop. I want to start by stating that the University of Michigan is committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and the needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our diverse community. So the topics that I'm going to go over in today's presentation are beginning with defining what a non-apparent condition is, giving some examples of what those conditions or non-apparent disabilities look like, discussing the environmental impact on an individual's disability, talking about some accommodation options for some scenarios I'm going to discuss, and then wrapping up by going over the process for disclosure and requesting accommodations and strategies for advocating for oneself. So as I stated, I'm going to start by defining what a non-apparent condition is. So before we do that, we want to talk about disability first. So not just a non-apparent disability, but disability more collectively. And the definition for a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Substantial limitation is determined by the comparison to an average person in the general population. So what may be substantially limiting for one person might not be for somebody else. Some examples of major life activities include bending, breathing, caring for oneself, concentrating, hearing, and so on and so forth. These can be due to visual limitations. These major life activities can encompass motor skills, cognitive skills. So there's a variety listed here, but this is not a full, non-exhaustive list. The definition of disability also includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they don't currently have a disability. An example of this would be somebody who has a history of cancer, but is currently in remission or not receiving treatment. This definition of disability also includes individuals who don't have a disability but are regarded as such. An example of this is if somebody is assumed to have a physical or mental impairment when in fact they don't. Now that we've defined what a disability is, I want to go further into what a non-apparent disability is as the primary conversation of today's discussion. So non-apparent disabilities, they can't be easily seen or detected by others. A non-apparent disability, this is the recommended terminology. They've otherwise been called hidden disabilities or invisible disabilities. It's recommended that non-apparent disability be used as this implies that the disability is just that. It's non-apparent. It does not imply any negative connotation. And we believe that disability is a strength and it doesn't matter what type of disability somebody has. Hidden disability can imply that the person with the disability is purposefully withholding this information. So there is a difference between choosing to not self-disclose a disability versus actively hiding it. And then lastly, that invisible disability that's listed here. For some people with disabilities, this term can be taken offensively. It suggests that the person is not visible or you can't discern that the person has a disability, which is not always true. The same is true for non-visible disability. So non-apparent disabilities can sometimes become apparent depending on the type of disability and the symptomology. So throughout this presentation, you'll hear me talk about non-apparent disabilities. And more specifically, the definition for that is a physical, mental, or neurological condition that is not visible from the outside, yet can limit or challenge a person's movements, senses, and or activities. So to the right, we have an image that says some disabilities look like this. We have an individual utilizing a cane, somebody with a walker, a wheelchair, crutches. And then at the bottom, it says, and some look like this. And there isn't an apparent disability or use of an adaptive device in that image. So now that we've defined what a non-apparent condition is, I want to get into some examples of them. And so some people may have heard of some of these, you might be familiar with some, and others you may not have realized were a disability. So some examples of non-apparent disabilities are ADHD, allergies, anxiety, arthritis, bipolar disorder, cancer, chronic fatigue or pain, depression, diabetes, heart disease, migraines. This is a non-exhaustive list. And on the right, we have a photo here that says sometimes disabilities are invisible. So we may not see the condition that the individual has when looking at them from the exterior. In the next few slides, I'm going to go over 3 different scenarios that involve different non-apparent conditions. As an accessibility specialist, my primary role is to facilitate the interactive process for faculty and staff at U of M. The interactive process consists of identifying and implementing reasonable workplace accommodations. If you'd like to learn more about what this process is, what it entails, I would encourage you to check out the Disability Equity Office's website, where we have past presentations posted, as well as informational content listed. We also have a presentation that is specific to the steps of the interactive process. However, during this process, there are dialogues that occur with the employee's unit. During these conversations, we do not disclose the employee's diagnosis, but rather we speak to the limitations of their disability. The examples in the next few slides will talk about hypothetical scenarios of different diagnoses, the functional limitations that are associated with their condition, and then potential workplace barriers that somebody with their disability may experience. All right, the first one I'm going to go over is a migraine. So as an accessibility specialist, hypothetically, I might have an employee come to me and say, I experience migraines. These are substantially limiting for me, and I'm looking into some workplace accommodations. The functional limitations that that employee may experience are thinking, interacting with others, seeing, and concentrating. And this could be variable based off of what type of migraine they have, the symptomology, how it presents itself. So on the right, I have a picture of an individual and it shows different types of migraines and how they may impact our vision for some or concentration for others. For this hypothetical scenario that I put together for today's presentation, I'm going to say that the workplace barriers this employee was experiencing related to bright overhead lighting, increased auditory input. This could be things like a loud HVAC system, if there's colleague collaboration happening nearby, or if they're by a window and there's construction happening outside. This employee also talked about how the heat was increasing their symptoms and then having extended screen time for computer-based work. They found all of these workplace barriers to kind of trigger their symptoms and make matters worse. For our second scenario we're going to talk about, this is for an employee who has chronic pain as their diagnosis. The functional limitations they experience are more related to the manual or physical aspects of pain. So this relates to bending, working, walking, performing manual tasks, lifting, standing, and sitting. For this scenario that we've put together, the workplace barriers that are impacted are the frequency and duration of meetings that they have, having a standard workstation setup, the storage location of the office supplies that they have to access during the day, repetitive movements necessary to complete their job tasks, and then the requirement of transporting heavy materials to different locations throughout their office. And then the last diagnosis that's being used for our scenarios for today's learning purposes is a traumatic or acquired brain injury. And I have some potential limitations listed here. These are not the ones for the scenario, but the reason I have all of these listed is because these are all of the ones that are listed on the Accommodation Medical Request Form, otherwise known as an AMRF. These are provided by our office and filled out by medical providers when individuals are seeking accommodations. So I listed all of them because depending on where the brain injury was impacted, any of these could be listed. This is because the frontal lobe, designated in the front of the brain or in red on the picture, this encompasses a lot of executive functioning skills, problem solving, reasoning, emotional traits. The parietal lobe, which is in the middle, denoted in yellow, this allows people to discern their left from their right, to feel and process sensation, their body orientation, and then their ability to read. In the back of the brain, designated in green, is the occipital lobe. This is the primary vision center, so this assists with color perception and visual traits. On the bottom in purple is the cerebellum. This is primarily motor and movement traits for an individual, so balance, coordination, fine motor control. In the middle, we have blue, that's the temporal lobe. This has a lot to do with hearing, as well as memory and understanding language. Lastly, the thin long line that is in silver or gray is the brainstem. And this is a lot of regulatory systems of the body. So breathing, body temperature, digestion, alertness and sleep patterns. I wanted to talk about all of these because brain injuries can be complex, as some of the lobes may be impacted or not others. One may be isolated or it may involve a number of them. To narrow it down for our hypothetical scenario in today's workshop, we're going to say that the limitations were more related to that frontal lobe. And so it's thinking, concentrating, speaking are really impacted. For this scenario, the workplace barriers that the employee is experiencing are the ability to complete large projects by their deadlines, following instructions that are provided in meetings, and then the ability to project their voice loudly when giving presentations to their department. Now, I know that was a lot of information. We're going to come back to it and have it presented in applicable scenarios for accommodations later. But I wanted to start by just giving you those diagnoses, their limitations, and thinking about some of those workplace barriers as we go into our next section. So keep these in the back of your mind. So environmental impact on an individual's disability is what we're going to talk about next. And this is because I want to focus on how the environment can impact an individual in those functional limitations we just talked about. So when interacting with the environment, what exactly does that mean? And if we're looking at accommodations, what does it mean to adapt and modify the environment for someone with a disability? I'm an occupational therapist, and a large part of our jobs as an OT is looking at the person, their environment, and the occupation. So when we're looking at the person, we're encompassing their disability and how it impacts them, as well as their strengths and limitations. When we're looking at the environment, this is how they interact with their environment. So their social and physical elements. And then their occupation, these are the things they need, want, or would like to do throughout their day. And so that encompasses things like our jobs. So disability is the interaction between somebody's life circumstances and their environment. So it's really important that we address the interaction between all of these factors. Now, specifically, I talked about physical and social limitations. So I'm going to break these down a little bit more. Physical barriers can take the form of a structural or sensory issue in the environment that may impede somebody's functioning. So some examples of physical limitations of the environment could be lighting that is too bright or too dim. And the reason I include both is because for somebody who has low vision, a dim environment may inhibit their performance, whereas with somebody who has light-triggered migraines, those bright LED overhead lights may also limit them. If there are vague maps that are difficult for individuals to interpret directions within buildings, this is another example of a physical limitation, or poor ergonomic setups. Some considerations of ways to improve our physical environment is by making sure that we know what parking is available and accessible, providing proper wayfinding, having various entryway thresholds. So rather than just a stair entry, making sure that we have accessible entryways with ramps, having a variety in our lighting, sound, and considering the scent of the environment, as well as making sure that we have ergonomic workstation layouts that are able to be adapted to people's different bodies or their disabilities, depending if there is also equipment included. Next, I want to talk about the social limitations of somebody's environment. So, supports and barriers within a social environment can often impact one's abilities to seek out resources, tools, or even formal workplace accommodations. Examples of this would be group projects. These may benefit some individuals who are more conversational and they thrive when they have the ability to collaborate with colleagues, whereas others could be hindered in these environments. It may be that there are distractions from that auditory input. They're finding it difficult to focus on what they need to do. These individuals may perform more effectively when they can work individually. So we want to consider different learning styles with social environments. Some people may learn better visually, some auditorily, some are a hybrid of both. Others are more kinetically, having the ability to do things hands-on. We also want to consider communication styles within our social environment. So some people may do better with written instructions. Others may retain it better if it was provided verbally. And for some, they might hear it well in a meeting, but having an email follow-up where they can view it in writing is also helpful. And lastly, interactions of our social environment. So facial expressions. Some people may be more expressive and others may have more of a flat expression, as well as tone. We don't want to read into different tones. We don't know the reason behind why somebody may be expressing a certain tone. And same with eye contact. So some people might not maintain a certain level of eye contact because they're trying to focus. For others, it may make them uncomfortable. There are various reasons why people may interact the way they do. So we don't want to read into the reasoning why, but rather we want to adjust our social environment to make it as inclusive and accessible as it can be for all of the varying needs within our workspaces. So now we've had the opportunity to discuss a few different diagnoses. More specifically, we honed in on 3 disabilities that are scenarios we're going to use for accommodations. We talked about the limitations associated with those examples, the workplace barriers that our hypothetical employees were experiencing in those scenarios, and then the impact that social and physical environments can have on employees. So to tie it all together, I want to begin by discussing some potential accommodation options that may be reasonable for each of our previous scenarios. So going back to those scenarios, the first one we talked about were migraines. So I do want to note that not each of the accommodations I'm going to talk about would be a reasonable solution for any individual who experiences migraines in the workplace. This is because accommodations are explored on an individual basis. So how the diagnosis presents itself in each individual, what the specific triggers are, what their workplace barriers may be, the limitations that are impacted, as well as what the essential functions of their job are, and how the accommodation may impact business operations and other factors. As a reminder, back to the scenario, the limitations presented for our employee with migraines were thinking, interacting with others, seeing, and concentrating. So when considering those, some accommodations that may be useful are looking at ways to adjust that bright overhead lighting. That was a workplace barrier they were experiencing. So if we look at things like light filters, on the right-hand side, I have an image of an overhead light in different kind of canopy or filters that can block out that light or project a different color. Can we switch out bulbs in overhead lighting so that it's a little bit more dim? We can look into installing a dimmer switch so that the individual can make it brighter or lighter throughout the day based upon their circumstances and their symptoms that day. If we don't have a dimmer, maybe providing the ability to turn lights off and giving task lighting as an alternative. So a desk lamp or a floor lamp within the office so that it can be modified. So that bright overhead lighting may have been something that was really impacting this individual's ability to think and concentrate and see. Maybe they were having to close their eyes, take breaks. So if we can modify that, they may be able to be more perform more effectively in their role. Another workplace barrier that they talked about was the increased auditory input. So can we relocate their desk away from those louder HVAC systems or heavy traffic areas if people walk through often? Can we provide noise canceling headphones so that that individual, maybe we can't relocate where they're at, but we can give them equipment or a tool to help block out some of that sound. If they're in an area where there's a lot of echoey sounds, we could explore sound absorption panels that could be put either lofting from the ceiling or on a wall. If it's available, can we explore a private office if that's within the means of the physical space of their work environment? We can also look into a hybrid schedule or the ability to work remotely when that person doesn't have in-person essential functions required on a specific day. In this example, the employee also talked about how heat was a trigger. So we would want to explore different things, and this would depend on if they work in a shared space or if they have that private office. So we could look into things like localized climate control, the ability to work in alternative spaces, or having different cooling devices such as a fan, or an ice pack, or different items that they can keep on site if they are starting to experience exacerbation of those symptoms. And then the last workplace barrier that they talked about in this example was extended screen time for their computer-based work tasks. With this, we could explore, is there an ability to implement some rest breaks into their workday? This might be accomplished by alternating their work style. So for example, having a chunk of the day where they can switch between a computer-based task and doing another job-related task that doesn't require them to look at the computer. Being able to switch between those on and off so that that screen time isn't extended and cumulative for a period of time. When we're looking at different equipment that we could order or apply, we could also explore anti-glare screen filters that could be put on the computer. Maybe they're in a role that primarily requires them to be on that computer and chunking or rotating job tasks isn't able to be accomplished. The anti-glare screen filter would be a great alternative to look into. As a reminder, our second hypothetical scenario was an employee who had chronic pain. So similar to the last example, these accommodations would need to be assessed on an individual basis and are dependent upon various factors, such as their essential job functions and business operations. The limitations that were listed for this one were bending, working, walking, performing manual tasks, lifting, standing, and sitting. So this was a more motor-based physical limitation for pain. In this scenario, the employee talked about how the frequency and duration of meetings was a workplace barrier for them. Some accommodation options we could explore are, again, breaks. Can they have the ability to get up and move around throughout these meetings? So maybe that physical pain begins to exacerbate when it's a longer meeting. So being able to get up and explore some movement to alleviate that. Or if symptoms are truly exacerbating where they're having difficulty really being able to tolerate sitting or moving throughout that meeting, and maybe they need to mitigate their symptoms a different way more privately. Could the unit provide the option for an employee to participate in meetings virtually? So maybe they go back to their office, they log in, they're still getting that content, but they can more privately mitigate those symptoms on their own in their own environment. Another workplace barrier this employee reported was their standard workstation setup. So this was making it difficult for them with their pain to sit in a desk that was situated a certain way in a chair that couldn't be adapted. It's helpful to assess for postural needs and any ergonomic modifications. This could include things like a monitor riser, if it's maybe that they're bending forward too much and their neck's starting to have pain, or a lumbar chair support that could be applied to help with some back pain. Offering a sit to stand desk or even a hydraulic topper that allows a monitor to be raised and lowered. So then they can have the opportunity to sit or stand based off of their needs. Having a walking pad underneath their desk, or even just the location of the supplies on their desk and making sure the layout is in a way that they're not overreaching and bending in different ways that aren't supportive or conducive for their diagnosis. Another workplace barrier listed was the storage location of their office supplies. So for a circumstance like this, it could be helpful to relocate those frequently used items so that they're at a chest or eye level height so that they can be easily obtained without having to reach or bend excessively for this employee. Similarly, they talked about repetitive movements exacerbating their pain. So again, this is one where we can look into rest breaks or alternating our work style. So formatting the day to plan for transitional tasks that reduce the duration of repetitive movements in that same plane of motion. So giving breaks for something that's really repetitive to make sure that we're not straining those symptoms. And then looking into what ergonomic equipment may assist with improved posture. This could be things like a split keyboard, a different kind of mouse, or having a wrist pad that's added to a keyboard. The last workplace barrier this employer reported was the need to transport heavy materials throughout their office. So, in this circumstance, an accommodation that could be explored is the use of a dolly or a rolling cart so that once those items are picked up and they're placed onto this equipment, they're able to roll it so that they don't have to do that transport and do an extended lift and carry. So again, these would all be assessed on a case by case scenario and through conversation with the employee and their unit to see what's going to be the best fit. But these are just some starting points of potential accommodations. And then for our last example, we talked about an individual with a brain injury. So the limitations that we had talked about for this one were specific to their ability to think, concentrate, and speak. With this employee, they discussed the completion of large projects as a workplace barrier they were having difficulty with. Some different things we could explore as an accommodation is different project management software to assist with breaking projects down into smaller and maybe more manageable tasks. These are things like Asana or Monday.com. To the right, I have a screenshot of a calendar, and this is a visual calendar that helps depict task by task deadlines, and it's color coordinated to help remain on pace for completion and see how much time needs to be allotted or spent for each one. Another option could be one-on-one supervisory meetings to discuss different plans and steps. So the employee may talk about the large-scale project they have and their plan for breaking it down with more short-term deadlines to keep themselves on pace. They could review this with their supervisor, get some feedback, and do check-in points for that accountability to assist with meeting those deadlines for the large projects. Another one was completing instructions that are provided in meetings. This was another barrier reported by the employee. Some recommendations for accommodations could be requesting that meeting agendas or action items be included in those meetings, providing the instructions both verbally during the meeting, but also in a written format, whether that's through a designated note taker that gives shared meeting minutes, or if it's in a follow-up email after the meeting. And lastly, this individual had spoke about having difficulty projecting their voice in order to speak at department presentations. Some options for an accommodation could be providing a voice amplification device. This could be something like a microphone that just helps project their voice to be a little bit louder so that everybody in the room is able to receive that information. When doing this and looking into devices and equipment, we want to make sure that we provide the employee with the opportunity to practice in advance and that we're arranging setup time with ITS so that there is proper utilization and that the tech equipment works properly when implemented for the accommodation. So those were just 3 hypothetical scenarios. We wanted to give a better understanding of what a disability could look like, more specifically a non-apparent condition, some of the limitations these employees may experience, the workplace barriers that they're trying to overcome to make sure that they are meeting those essential job functions, and then what tools, resources, or adaptations could be provided as accommodations to support our employees. The next section I want to talk about is disclosure and the ability to request accommodations. So when disclosing to an employer, this is an individual decision for employees to make. We have a chart on this slide, and on the left-hand side in green, it shows 3.2%. This depicts the average percentage of employees who self-identify as having a disability to their employers. On the right-hand side, denoted in purple, we have a pie chart that says 30%. This is the percentage of employees with disabilities. What this chart tells us is that there's a substantial number of people who have disabilities, but they are not disclosing. And this could be for positive reasons. For example, they aren't experiencing barriers in the workplace and they don't need to disclose or request accommodations, or it could be due to some negative ones that I'm going to talk about in the next slide. These are the top factors considered by employees prior to disclosing their disabilities. Their anxiety about the process, so not knowing what to say or what could help, what resources are available. Medical documentation, whether they have it available or if they can have concerns of it being sufficient for the process. Fear, concerns about losing one's job, being treated differently by their supervisors or colleagues, being discriminated or retaliated against. Individuals can also be overwhelmed by options. So where do they go for access and support? Who's their first step? They can also become exhausted by being redirected too many times or disclosed without a resolution. And then lastly, negative experiences. This could be from their past, the past of others, things that they've observed in the workplace or heard about that could impact their choice to disclose or not. There are some advantages and disadvantages to disclosure. Some ways that U of M works to prevent these things from happening is that we have university-based policies, standard practice guidelines or SPGs, and then the Equity, Civil Rights, and Title IX office also has services and through various trainings such as this workshop to assist with learning more. So the advantages of disclosure are receiving support and being able to pursue reasonable workplace accommodations, having legal protections against discrimination as specified in the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, a reduction of stress, because protecting your private information can take a lot of energy, as well as masking and camouflaging to kind of fit within the work environment while not disclosing. And then improving your self-image through your own self-advocacy. Some disadvantages, which were talked about on the previous slide, is that individuals may feel that they receive different, unfair, or unwelcome treatment. They can experience exclusion. They may be blamed for issues or problems. Disclosure can result in conflicting feelings about self-image. These individuals may feel that they're seen as needy or not self-sufficient, especially those who are seeking or requesting accommodations or different resources. And then the feeling of being overlooked for team activities. So, like I said earlier, disclosure is a personal choice, and I want to talk about how to disclose for those who are interested. A common misconception is that employees are required to share their diagnosis with their supervisor. That is not correct. Supervisors will need to know about an accommodation and the limitations or barriers that the employee is experiencing, but they do not need to know the specific condition or diagnosis of the employee. So that's why I went through those scenarios earlier. So with a migraine, the employee would not have to disclose to their employer that the migraine is what they're experiencing, but those challenges with thinking, interacting with others, and seeing, it's important to know those limitations and then the barriers in the workplace in order to identify a reasonable or helpful accommodation. Medical information is only shared privately and confidentially with the Disability Equity Office when somebody is requesting an accommodation through our office. So we would look at that medical, make a disability determination, and talk to the employee about it. However, their disability diagnosis nor their medical documentation is shared with their unit. On the right, I have an image here that says a hidden problem. 16% of US employees report having a non-apparent disability. 47% of those employees have chosen not to disclose their non-apparent disability at work. And 31% believe that disclosure would cause others to think that they couldn't do their work. So that kind of explains a little bit about decisions that go into disclosure, how people may fear disclosing, as well as just some statistics around non-apparent conditions in the workplace. Now, if somebody is wanting to disclose their disability and pursue accommodations, U of M does offer many avenues to pursue. So one could be going directly to your immediate supervisor and or HR representative. Another option is going through the Disability Equity Office, where we would facilitate the interactive process between the employee and the employer. And then work connections for temporary accommodations of 6 months or less, and then short or long-term disability or other leave options. When talking about disclosing to your supervisor, please note that this disclosure should be only the need for the accommodations, but it doesn't need to include medical documentation or a specific diagnosis. Alternatively, I want to share some steps a manager can take when an accommodation request is received from an employee. If you're a manager, make sure that you're implementing the requested accommodation if you're able to. Consult with the Disability Equity Office if you have questions. We are here to help. We do consultations for employees and the employer, and we have staff who have specialized training and access to resources to help answer your questions and guide along the way. And if the employees are referred to our office, we do have a centralized storage for their medical documentation, as well as any accommodation documents that are produced throughout the interactive process. We would also encourage the manager to follow up with the requester. We want to make sure that their needs are met. So ask your employee, what can I do to help? How's the accommodation been going? Has this been working out? Making sure that you're receiving that information and that you're documenting it accordingly throughout the process. And especially maintain their privacy. The interactive process is a confidential one, and we should not be sharing our employees' information about their requests for accommodations or what differences have been provided so that they have access to these resources. Now, lastly, for employees, we're not always sure if we want to disclose, and maybe we want to request accommodations. Maybe we want to find new ways to self-advocate for ourselves while navigating this territory of disabilities in the workplace. Some ways that employees can self-advocate are first by assessing your own comfort level and needs. So do you need an accommodation? Are you comfortable having those dialogues? Do you want to go through that interactive process and have the Disability Equity Office facilitate that? Another option is contacting affinity groups. There are groups on campus for individuals who have like-minded interests or experiences that may be helpful to talk through your circumstances. They may have a lived experience similar where they have some guidance. Engage resources. Employees providing themselves with the right to utilize benefits. An example of this could be for an employee who's requesting those breaks or the ability to transition work tasks. Maybe it's somebody who already has access to a flexible schedule. They have the autonomy to manage their own schedule, implement breaks as they need, or schedule the order that they're doing tasks. Utilize those benefits to your advantage. Make sure you're scheduling your day in a way that you are the most effective and able to perform best for yourself, your symptoms, and your job. Consider your lived experiences and circumstances, and then don't stigmatize your diagnosis by acting on the fears of others' perspectives. So like I said, utilize those benefits rather than thinking, I don't want to change my schedule in that way. My other colleague always does all of their meetings in the morning and then all of their documentation in the afternoon. If you're somebody who's going to benefit from alternating between these tasks, and if it doesn't inhibit business operations and is going to be best for you to thrive in the workplace, don't compare yourself and utilize that benefit to do so. As I stated earlier, there are some affinity groups on campus. I have them linked here. There are two different links. One is for the employee resource groups that are available on campus, and the other one is to the LSA affinity groups. I do want to note this is not specific just for LSA employees. This is open to all of U of M employees. Specifically for non-apparent conditions, there's actually a group for individuals with ADHD and ADD who are looking to connect with others for the purposes of mutual support and being able to share resources, techniques, and strategies. So I pulled some information from their website and put it on here. They were meeting monthly or however often the members felt would be worthwhile. For a point of communication, they had a group email to connect electronically between their meetings. And then I've included the point of contact at the bottom of this presentation for anybody who's interested. I just want to say thank you from the Disability Equity Office. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you want to pursue a workplace accommodation or meet for a consultation if you just have questions on where to start, what's available, and what we could do to assist you. Thanks for attending today's workshop.